Alright, YouTube, for some months, the Clinton campaign has been racked by scandals, especially lately with WikiLeaks, with O'Keefe's videos, Cernovich weighing in on the 33,000 emails. It looks like the DNC was fairly aware that voter busing was going on, probably has been for some while. The fact that the Republicans and Democrats both do similar things does not mean that the fact that we have Bob Creamer and Fovel on tape openly discussing it is not significant within the election. But I want to go further. I want to talk about the issue that most concerns me, and that's war. Specifically, atomic war, atomic standoff, and/or proxy conflict. Years and years ago, I was aware of what was going on before we invaded Iraq. I was paying attention. I saw the way that the media talked about Iraq. I saw the way that George W. talked about Iraq. And it was kind of obvious what was coming. Now, before it was announced, it was fairly obvious that the Western world was gearing up for something. It probably was going to include North Korea, considering their inclusion within the so-called axis of evil at the time that was spoken of. You had these political buzzwords that were easy to remember bandied around. You had politicians casting people off as unpatriotic or un-American if they didn't support the war effort. Behold, look at the media and look at the Clinton campaign right now, and what do you have? Oh, you're un-American if you pay attention to WikiLeaks. You're un-American if you don't condemn Russia completely. You're un-American if you don't want a no-fly zone in Syria. If you disagree with our campaign platform at all, you're un-American, you're unpatriotic, you should know better. Sit down and shut the fuck up because we're going to go and water the deserts with some more blood. That's exactly what the Clinton campaign's been talking about. I will say this. The reason that Hillary Clinton, and I say this with 100% certainty, didn't clearly answer the question that she was given at the last debate on the subject of a no-fly zone in Syria. Well, what do you do if a Russian aircraft approaches that region and flies through your no-fly zone? Do you attack it? Why do you think she didn't answer the question? It's because the answer is too horrific to say on a live debate stage. The answer is yes. Hillary Clinton is insane enough to fire upon a Russian aircraft. Meanwhile, the same people that supported the war in Iraq, including Clinton herself, are beating the drums of war right now, waiting, salivating to get us involved in another foreign conflict. I don't think that that's a good idea. When the president was a Republican and suggested going into Iraq, I didn't think it was a great idea. We were already involved in Afghanistan on what turned out to be fairly faulty intelligence, let's face it. We ended up dicking around over there. No fault to our soldiers or our generals. They were completely restrained by politicians. It was just like Vietnam. There's a reason that we got our asses whooped on a daily basis. We should have known better. We should have learned from the example of the Russians themselves when they tried to invade Afghanistan. But no, said DC, we have the capability to solve this problem. We can march anywhere in the world, even an inland nation with no actual oceanic coast to land on. I'm sure that we can control this situation. Never mind the fact that half of the country is nothing more than a bunch of mountains and caves easily hidden in. Oh, don't worry. And then when we started leaving, what ended up happening? ISIS came in. Whoopee! And the same thing happened in Iraq, which is 90% God-forsaken desert, other than when you're within 10 miles of the Euphrates or something like that. It was a bad idea then. It's a bad idea to get re-involved now. Syria being right next to Iraq is not a coincidence. Hillary Clinton is nuts. She wants to begin a war in Syria. The way in which she is talking about Syria and Russia is exactly the same as how George W. Bush, this is why she voted for the war, this is why she's got the Bushes on board with her campaign. It's exactly the same as what the things that were said for more than a year before we invaded Iraq. It's exactly the same. If you weren't paying attention, I was. I kept up with what the mainstream media, the legacy media at the time was saying. Of course, back then it wasn't a legacy media. I paid attention. I saw how they referred to Saddam as Satan, as a devil, a potential Russian pawn, and things of that nature. It was just Red Scare 2.0. And the reason why they did this is fairly clear. It makes it easier to get people to sign up to go over and die for a bunch of rich people to get richer. That's what the Iraq War ultimately was about. That and maneuvering around Russia. It had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with toppling Saddam Hussein. It didn't have to do with liberating anybody. 500,000 people died. The country is still destabilized. We're still throwing money at it. It's never going to get better until we stop involving ourselves there entirely. Syria will not magically improve. Aleppo will not be unbombed. Refugees will not swarm back into Syria and magically begin rebuilding after everything that they've ever known has been totally decimated, just because we get involved in Syria. You run a no-fly zone in Syria, you get involved with Syria, possibly Iran, maybe even Russia itself, you could start World War III. You could start an atomic holocaust on this planet that will kill most of the world's population. I am wondering, where are these magical leftists that spoke up with such virulence back when George W. Bush was talking about invading Iraq? Oh, don't worry, it'll be limited. Shock and awe. We're going to bomb some critical stuff. We'll march in force. We'll get Saddam. We'll requisition these chemical weapons that he has, and we'll leave. And it turned out that much of that wasn't true. We didn't leave right away. Shock and awe, while it decapitated their military, did nothing about partisan fighters, which is what Al-Qaeda was at the time. Now they're more of a mafia-style syndicate that honestly is worried about ISIS tactics. Now we've got ISIS to deal with too. We've got Boko Haram, and we've got Al-Qaeda, and we've got ISIS. We've still got a Mujahideen that's active. We've still got the Taliban over in Central Asia. We've got all of these problems, and they all seem to spawn from our own actions. Why do you think that is? It's because DC doesn't know what it's doing. They're completely incompetent. Hillary Clinton thinks it's a great idea to go send your sons and daughters over back into the Middle East to go die. That's what she wants to do. If she didn't think that was a good idea, she wouldn't be announcing a no-fly zone that won't work because the Russians will stage an incursion and they'll challenge us directly. One of two things then happens, and you'd better hope that the Russians are cowards. They either chicken out and they step back, which I don't think is going to happen, or an atomic holocaust happens. Or Clinton chickens out, in which case, what's the point of the no-fly zone in the first place? It's not going to accomplish anything. It'll be just like Obama's red line that supposedly Assad crossed. I will say this. I don't support arming the FSA. I don't support arming anybody in the region. We tried this tactic in the 1980s with the same people that eventually became Al-Qaeda. We armed the Mujahideen. We gave them weapons, we gave them money, we gave them advice, we gave them all sorts of training. They curb-stomped the Russians. Great. USSR gets beaten back. Doesn't make inroads into turning Afghanistan into nothing more than a satellite state. That's great. Problem solved. But then a bigger problem erupted. 9/11 being the direct result of the fact that we pumped the area so full of destabilizing weapons and money, and we allowed all of these fatwa-issuing fighters to suddenly go and manage opium fields, thus getting even more money over time. We fucked up the world with our Afghanistan policy. And we're going to fuck up the world with our policy in Syria if Clinton is elected. Now, do I think that Trump would fare significantly better? Maybe. It's not exactly clear. It's clear that he's not a Russian pawn, as Clinton wants to cast him as. He does appear to want diplomacy with Russia, though, and that's something we haven't had for a while. Riddle me this. Since when did we decide that it was a bad thing to try to reach across and at least have somewhat amiable relationships with Russia? Since when have we decided that Russia is such an utter monster, such a total demon, that we can't even talk to them? That we can't hold any form of dialogue? Do you know why the ceasefires that Kerry keeps trying to negotiate in Syria keep failing? It's because the United States is not willing to back off the tired old line that somehow the FSA represents the best interests of the Syrian people. Why should a bunch of nationalist Islamofascists who still support Sharia law And the only difference between them and ISIS is that they want a nationalist system behind their Islamofascism rather than a caliphate that spans multiple countries. Since when is it a good thing to support that kind of person? Sounds a lot like the Mujahideen. Oh, well, we don't want international commies in Afghanistan, says Carter back in the end of the 70s, or Ronald Reagan in his first term. We don't want commies taking over the area. We'll put a bunch of nationalists in charge who just happen to be hardline Islamists. Theocrats. Religious nationalists. Oh, sounds like a great idea. They beat the crap out of the USSR. It's fine. Tens of thousands of Russians died in the engagement there. There are statues over there made out of decapitated Soviet-era tanks that they still have up as little monuments to show where they killed all of those USSR soldiers. That's fine. Nobody had a problem with that because it was an aggressive move by the USSR. But at what cost? Now they're raising hell in Russia, they're raising hell in Europe, they're raising hell in the United States, and Clinton wants to get us involved in another country. Syria, while run by a tin-horn dictator who is a little bit like Saddam Hussein, was fundamentally better off, fundamentally much more stable, far more wealthy than it is now under what could be called 5 or 6 nations different leadership. There's an area controlled by Assad. The FSA controls zones. ISIS controls some areas. The Kurds control some areas. Turkey has gone into some areas. The Russians and Iranians are involved. It's literally like the grand chessboard microcosm right now. Do you honestly think the U.S., by getting an erection and thwomping its dick out in the middle of Damascus, suddenly is going to make the situation better? Did it work in Iraq? No. Did it work in Vietnam? No. Did it work in Korea? No. Did it work in Afghanistan? No. Did it work during the Persian Gulf War? No. Did it work in Yugoslavia with the Serbian crisis there? No, not really. It's never worked. When we insert ourselves into these political situations, we tend not to fare well. If the United States is attacked, the enemy will be totally destroyed. There'll be nothing left of them. We don't lose that kind of engagement, and we haven't in quite some time. If we decide to attack a symmetric foe, typically goes really well for us. But when we insinuate ourselves into such a situation, it's never worked. Only this time it's a little bit different because the Russians have already landed there. They're already defending Assad. There is nothing, I am telling you, that we can do to dislodge them now. If there was a chance to get involved, if Obama really wanted to kill Bashar al-Assad because he's that convinced that he's that much of a demon, that we have to summarily hang him like we did Saddam Hussein after a kangaroo court trial that didn't even allow the preponderance of evidence, then we should have done that. But we didn't. We didn't do that, and it's too late now. If Hillary Clinton is elected, and she's allowed, unfortunately Congress would probably be dumb enough to do this because it's likely that the House will still be controlled by Republican warhawk neocons. If she gets her no-fly zone in Syria, we will be on the eve of destruction in the most literal sense. I don't bandy around end times banter on a whim. I've spoken before about the fact that we're pretty close to midnight on a nuclear scale because the timeline of humanity involves a very short period of time that we've actually had the means to destroy ourselves. For most of man's time period, it was only nature that could kill us, with an epidemic, a supervolcano, massive meteor strike, doesn't really matter, but it was nature that could do that. We've only had the ability to do that for less than 100 years. It's only been about 80 years since we gained that ability. And far less when we're talking about modern nuclear weapons as opposed to the primitive atomic type. You know, the county killers, the nation killers, something that a single bomb can destroy basically all of a state the size of Belgium, or could rip most of central Texas to pieces, or completely debilitate my home state and leave everybody dead, either from fallout or from in the blast. They get completely vaporized. They turn to a pile of ashes. Relatively short on the human timeline. About half a century since we've had that ability, as far as the stockpile and the technology to have multi-stage, true modern nuclear weapons as opposed to the kind that were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, I have spoken of this before, but I've never had a reason to say, oh, well, X candidate's going to start a nuclear war. Well, people said that about Romney. People also said that about Obama. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they were both sort of, half-assed warmongers. Yeah, maybe we'll get involved, maybe we won't. Clinton has already made it clear she wants a no-fly zone. That alone is enough to push us to the brink of at least a Cuban Missile-style standoff, which is worrying enough. Riddle me this as well. How is Clinton supposed to conduct diplomacy with the Russian state after spending nearly a year blaming them for all of her problems, whether or not they were involved to begin with? The answer is she can't. She will not be able to work with the Russians because the Russians fucking hate her guts at this point, because she's blaming them for every leak and hack under the sun, whether or not she has the ability to know that the Russians were involved. I'd be kind of pissed too. We look at what happened in the Philippines the other day. What's happening to our alliances? Obama and Clinton have convinced people that somehow if Trump is elected, NATO falls apart, our Asian alliances fall apart, all the Hispanic countries will hate us, we'll be isolated, suddenly we'll be a pariah state, nobody will want to trade with us. Everybody will hate us, we'll collapse. End of society, Western civilization dead forever, Russia wins everything without a shot fired. That's what they've seemed to have convinced some people is the case. I say the opposite is true. You look at what's happening right now. The United States, in Obama's 2 terms, has managed to partner with Vietnam and open up to Cuba. But we've pissed off the UK, which is, by the way, a nuclear state, one of our foremost allies. We've managed to piss them off over the Brexit. We've pissed off the Germans with surveillance. We pissed off the Philippines enough so that now they are openly allying with China. We've lost the Philippines. They're no longer our ally. Thanks, Obama. I'll be reporting on this at some point later today. We've lost the Philippines, which is, there goes Clinton's ring around China, by the way. How the fuck are you supposed to ring the Chinese without the Philippines being involved? The answer is you can't. They're alienating everybody. All of our allies are going to end up former allies if we keep along this course. We can't keep spying on everybody in the world, blaming everybody else for our problems, and expect that that's going to win us any hearts and minds overseas, while simultaneously continuing to drone little children. There's a reason why there are so many militants in the Middle East and South Asia right now. Most of it's due to the U.S. foreign policy being a complete and abysmal failure. Because they decided that it was acceptable to have 75% civilian casualties whenever they conduct a drone strike. Good on you, Obama. I heartily agree. Fuck those orphans over there. It's just great that they're dead. I'm sure that their families won't take up arms. They'll just love the United States to death. By the way, let's take a few 100,000 refugees from these areas that we've fucked up. I'm sure they'll love the United States so much. I'm sure that they'll pour out emotion, just pure love for Obama, pure love for Clinton, pure love for everything United States. Even they didn't want to leave their state in the first place. We're helping them get bombed. You can blame it on Assad all day. Why is Assad bombing Aleppo? It's because the people that we're helping, we're funding, we're arming, we're advising, we're training, are causing a bunch of problems in that region. I would have much rather have dealt with Assad. Things were sleepy over there. There was nothing going on before we started fucking around encouraging a civil war. People have talked about in Washington, oh, it's an organic movement. The people of Syria have spoken. They want Assad out. That's not entirely clear. You said the same thing about Gaddafi, and yet Libya has turned into a cesspit now. I used to get a lot more hits, a lot more views from Libya. Now not so many, probably because ISIS has destroyed half of their critical infrastructure. You applauded the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They got forced back out by not only their people, but also their military because they were so bad. They completely usurped the rule of law in that country and attempted to turn it into a Sharia law theocracy. The people resisted. Thankfully, they were successful. As such, Egypt remains stable, peaceable, and boring. But that's not what Obama wants. He apparently wants more fighting. He wants more children to die. And Hillary Clinton, I'm here to tell you, if elected, wants the same thing. Because all you have to do is listen to what she didn't say when she was asked about Syria. It's not about what she did say. Oh, Bashar al-Assad's bad, the Russians are bad, espionage, blah, blah, Trump wants to do this, that, and the other. Okay, that's fine, Miss Clinton. Okay, we get it. You don't want to talk about the issue. But what didn't she say? She didn't say, no, I wouldn't fire upon Russian aircraft if they violated a no-fly zone. That's because she would fire upon them. She's actually dumb enough to do that. But she doesn't care. If a nuclear exchange is caused, what does she care? She has plenty of bunkers. She can just go right down into the tunnels and stay there for a year. And she knows if that happens, Russia gets wiped out too. They're not going to be invading anytime soon. China's gone. Europe's gone. Everything's basically gone, at least in the northern hemisphere and all the populated centers in the southern hemisphere. Oh, it'd be a grand new world for her. She climbs out with her respirator on. Of course, she'd probably be dead of a stroke at that point. She crawls out of the bunker with her detail, her security detail, and Bubba Bill immediately goes off to rape some corpses or something like that. This is what these people apparently are into. She's talking about starting a war, and people appear to have not even understood that. The way she's talking right now about Syria is exactly the way that we spoke about Iraq before we invaded there. Do we really need another retarded war that will solve nothing, destabilize the area, and lead to embarrassment and more terrorism down the road? Do we really need that? Did we not just go through this a few years ago? Did these same liberals, so-called, supposedly they're far left, peaceniks, they don't like war, they don't like the idea of bombing. I've seen them defending Obama's drone program. They're clueless. They don't even realize that most of the people dying are civilians. They're that stupid. They're totally partisan. They listen to the lamestream legacy hack media, the seven-figure salary-earning crap artists up on MSNBC or CNN, ranting about how rich people are the enemy, even though all of them are in that upper income bracket, and they just gobble it right down. But Hillary Clinton will start a war in Syria. Yeah, within 4 years, she'll have started a war there. Whether or not it leads to a nuclear standoff is anyone's guess. I guess it depends on Russia. If Russia's really as bad as she's casting it, do you honestly trust them not to violate our no-fly zone? And what happens if they do? You're actually dumb enough to fire upon Russian aircraft? Oh, blow them out of the sky. I'm sure that they won't respond by blowing our aircraft out of the sky. Oh, they blew our aircraft out of the sky? Huh? Sink one of their destroyers. Oh, they sunk one of our ships in return? Okay, launch one nuke at them. I'm sure they won't retaliate by starting World War III. This is the way that things can work in a Red Scare style scenario, in a Cold War. We're still in the Cold War. We never left it, and people ignored that too. Oh, Cold War's over. USSR collapsed. Oh, just ignore those thousands of Russian nuclear weapons. They won't be able to maintain them. Guess what? They have been able to maintain them. In fact, they've made them more advanced. They are modernizing their missile systems much more rapidly than we are, actually. The US has gone back to talking about manually dropped bombs from like B-52s and stuff like that. Are we a third world country? We do need a nuclear deterrent, but we should strive not to have to use it. We shouldn't be antagonizing other nuclear powers. Behold, Kerry pisses on... Obama tries to piss on India. It doesn't seem to have had much effect, thankfully. Kerry pisses on Pakistan. They all piss on Israel. I'm not a big fan of Israeli policy myself, but it doesn't help when you antagonize them openly. It helps to have a dialogue. Same with Palestine. You shouldn't, like the Republicans antagonize them constantly. It's just retarded. They've pissed off the UK, Germany, which hosts our missiles, Turkey, fairly obvious, China now, and the Philippines, which are now, they're a vassal state of China now, as of yesterday. Thanks, Obama. And then Russia. We're getting the entire world stacked against us. And people like Clinton and Obama will call you un-American for opposing their foreign policy solutions. That's crazy talk. I don't have to mindlessly support what Obama says, or be called a whiner if I don't, because your policy's not working. It's fairly clear. Syria's a shithole. Millions of people have fled. It's because of you. It's because of your policies. Nobody else caused that. Assad didn't magically one day wake up to a small organic civil war movement and decide to start barrel bombing Aleppo. That didn't happen. He was fighting this rather small number of rebels that were there, and we started propping the rebels up, and foreign fighters poured in, and that's why the situation is as it is today. Hillary Clinton wants to take advantage of the cesspool left behind by Obama, if she's elected, and go in and cause a bigger war. It'll probably involve Iraq. It won't be limited to Syria's borders. The borders are porous anyway. ISIS operates on both borders. The FSA is pouring across side to side. There are Turks there. There are Kurds there. Assad's forces. There's Iran. There are Russians there. The Chinese are offshore. What the hell are you thinking of? She's going to cause a war if she's elected. She is a warmonger. She is the war candidate. Antagonizing Russia. Sounds really great when you say, oh, Russia did espionage, Russia did hacking, Russia is so bad, Russia funds everybody we hate. Okay, you sound like Bush. Are you people so dumb you don't realize who she sounds like? She sounds exactly like W did before he decided to go butcher Saddam Hussein. Look at how that looked out. Wow, it worked out so well. It's so wonderful there in Iraq these days. It's so stable. It recovered so well. Infrastructure's great. Oil's pumping out. People are so wealthy. They love the United States. Oh, wait, that never happened. I wonder why. Could it be because of our bureaucratically strangled foreign policy? The fact that politicians fuck with the military and prevent them from doing what they need to do? The fact that we shouldn't have even gotten involved in the first place? And here's this vast hypocrite, Hillary Clinton, rambling. Oh, Trump supported the war in Iraq. Trump supported the war in Iraq. You voted for it. You were there. You were already in office. You voted for it. You glowingly praised it. You're apparently not sorry about the 500,000 civilians that died. You're not sorry to any of the thousands of U.S. soldiers that died, or the tens of thousands that have PTSD. You don't care about veterans. You'd rather bring in a bunch of refugees from areas that we ourselves are destabilizing, and you think that that's a good idea. Then you dream up the brilliant solution that we should run a no-fly zone over this country when the Russians are already there. Brilliant, just brilliant. It's like Dr. Strangelove. It's even worse. Even Dr. Strangelove couldn't have envisioned a scenario in which politicians would be that dumb. Never would have happened. Nobody could possibly believe that it's possible. In their most cynical nightmares, nobody back then could have imagined that a politician could be as dumb as Hillary Clinton is on this policy. But she actually is, and that's what concerns me. Hang the scandals, the WikiLeaks and all this, push it to the side for a moment and just think about how she talks about Syria and the fact that Russia's already there. That alone, on its own, in a vacuum away from every other thing she's ever said or done, should convince you that she's not worth voting for. She sounds like Richard Nixon with the madman strategy, which might make sense because she's a good friend of Kissinger himself. That's about all. Peace out.